It wasn't the sirens that started it. It wasn't the scream or the missing person flyer or even the bad dream officer Rachel Monroe had the night before. It was the dog. The damned dog who hadn't been active duty in 3 years. The dog who should have been too old to do what he did next. But when Atlas tore off down the muddy trail toward the Columbia River, nose low, legs pumping like pistons, Rachel's gut twisted into a knot she hadn't felt since the last time she saw a corpse pulled from the water. And just like that, routine was over. Everything normal in her day vanished like mist off the water. It was early morning. July heat hadn't yet set in, and the river wore a soft fog like a veil. Rachel had taken Atlas, her retired K-9 partner, for a short walk before her shift. She never even brought his vest. Why would she? They weren't on patrol. The most exciting thing she expected was a goose sighting, or maybe a jogger waving hello. Instead, the old German shepherd froze mid-step. Ears up, tail stiff. Rachel crouched beside him. "What is it, bud?" Then he bolted. "Atlas," she shouted, stumbling after him, trying not to slip on the dewy grass. Hey, stop." But Atlas was already gone, plunging down the embankment like he was chasing a ghost only he could see. By the time Rachel reached the edge, she saw him do something that made her heart stop cold. He dove into the river. Not a leap or playful splash, a mission. The Columbia isn't a lazy river. It pulls. It drags. People drown there every year. Rachel had pulled 2 teenagers out herself the summer before. So when she saw Atlas swimming with that same stubborn, determined stroke he used to use during training drills, cutting through current like a machine, she knew this wasn't instinct or play. It was memory, something buried, something remembered. "God, Atlas," she whispered, hand on her radio, but frozen. "What did you find?" Then she saw it. A dark shape bobbing a few feet ahead of him. Waterlogged, heavy, rectangular, sir. It looked like a suitcase. Rachel felt her legs move before she had a plan. By the time she reached the shore, Atlas had already caught the thing by its handle, and was paddling furiously back. The case fought him, kept trying to sink, but he wouldn't let go. He dragged it until his paws hit mud, until the shallow water lapped his chest, until he reached her boots and dropped the case at her feet like it was a damn stick he'd retrieved. Only this stick smelled wrong. The stench hit her like a slap, sweet metallic with the faint rot of something too old to be forgotten. She took a shaky breath and knelt beside the dog. "Where did you even, Atlas winded low in his throat and sat beside the case, eyes locked on it like it might try to escape. Rachel reached out and touched the zipper. The suitcase was navy, frayed along the edges, and strewn with algae. A tag had once been there, long gone now. She looked around. No one was near. No boats, no kids, just her, Atlas, and whatever was inside. Her radio crackled at her hip. "Unit 42, status check." Rachel grabbed it, her voice tight. 42, I need backup at the river access off Quarry Trail. I've got potential evidence. Could be human remains. K9 assist. Silence. 10-4, sending unit now. The silence returned as she stared at the case. She couldn't open it alone. That was protocol, but she didn't need to unzip it all the way. Just a peek, just enough to justify the call. Atlas let out a low growl as her hand moved toward the zipper. She stopped, looked at him. "Good boy," she whispered. "You remember, don't you?" He didn't move, just watched. She braced herself and pulled the zipper halfway. Her breath caught. Inside was a child's pink blanket, soaked and stained. Pressed against it, half buried, was what looked like a tiny shoe. Her fingers trembled as she zipped it shut. She didn't cry. Not yet. She stood up, swallowing the lump in her throat. Atlas stayed beside the case like a soldier guarding a secret. And Rachel, she just stood there, waiting for backup, knowing this wasn't going to be a normal shift. Not anymore. Somewhere deep down, she felt the cold snap of memory. A girl, a case, a failure. It was happening again. And this time, maybe the dog wouldn't let her forget. If you care about the silent heroes who uncover what humans miss, subscribe to the channel. These true stories aren't just about justice. They're about the loyal hearts that never stop searching. 10 minutes later, Officer Darnell pulled up in his cruiser. He jogged toward her, his face confused until he smelled the air, and saw Atlas sitting beside the soaked case like it was a grave marker. Rachel didn't say anything. She just pointed. Darnell knelt, lifted the corner of the case carefully, saw the same blanket. "Jesus," he muttered. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Rachel nodded. "I was on that call 8 years ago," she said quietly. "The Madison Lake case." Darnell's brows shot up. "You think this is her?" "I think Atlas does." They exchanged a long look. Neither of them mentioned the obvious. The body might not be Madison's. The case might be older or newer. The river holds secrets and gives them up when it feels like it. Later, after forensics arrived and carefully transported the suitcase, Rachel sat on the bumper of her SUV. Atlas rested his head on her lap, eyes still scanning the river. "You remembered," she whispered. The last time he'd acted like this was when Madison disappeared. Atlas had led her to the riverbank back then, too, barking like mad. But nobody, no evidence. The river had taken her, or so they thought. But what if it hadn't? What if it had just waited? Rachel ran a hand over the dog's fur, staring into the swirling current. What else was out there? And what had Atlas known all along? The stench didn't fade with distance. Even after the forensics team had packed the suitcase into an evidence bag and driven off, Rachel Monroe could still feel the smell in her hair, her clothes, like something had burrowed into her skin and wasn't letting go. It wasn't just the smell of decay. It was guilt. It was failure. It was memory. Atlas lay in the back seat of her cruiser, eyes open. But still, watching the river, even through the glass, like it still had something left to give. Rachel didn't speak on the drive back. Not to dispatch, not to the officer in the passenger seat, not even to herself. She just drove slowly, purposefully, like rushing might scare off the truth. By the time she reached the station, it was just past noon. The heat had settled in, heavy and stale. The kind of summer afternoon that made everything feel a little more unreal, like the world was sweating out secrets. The medical examiner hadn't opened the suitcase yet. Protocol meant they'd wait for a full team, including a child victim specialist and a representative from missing persons. But Rachel couldn't sit still. She paced the hallway outside the cold room like a tiger in a cage. She wasn't on the case officially. Hell, she hadn't even clocked in yet. But she couldn't walk away because deep down she already knew. That shoe, that blanket, it matched what Madison Lake was last seen wearing the day she disappeared. 8 years ago, Madison was 6 years old. Brown hair, gap-toothed smile, vanished during a Sunday picnic at Pine Ridge Park. Rachel was one of the lead officers in the early stages of the search. Atlas had just turned 4, his nose sharp, his loyalty sharper. They spent 3 days combing the woods, the trails, the riverside. Atlas had led her to the bank, same stretch they stood on this morning, and barked like hell, but there was no sign, no drag marks, no scent path leaving the water. After a week, the case went cold. After a month, it was labeled likely drowning. The Lake family moved 2 towns over. Rachel never forgot, and apparently, neither did Atlas. "Monroe," a voice called from down the hall. It was Darnell, holding a clipboard and looking like he'd seen a ghost. They opened it. Rachel turned so fast her knee cracked, and he hesitated. We've got partial remains, small bones, fabric scraps, the blanket, a pink sneaker, and what looks like a silver chain necklace. It's not a full skeleton. Identification? Too soon to tell, but he handed her the clipboard. Me says the shoe size is closer to a 3 or 4-year-old. That's younger than Madison was. Rachel stared at the page. A chill traced her spine. You're saying it might not be her? I'm saying we may have opened a whole different nightmare. Back in her office, Rachel pulled out the old case files. Madison's was on top, worn, yellowed, with corners chewed by time and frustration. Underneath were 6 others. Children gone missing within a 10-mile radius of the Columbia over the last 15 years. Most of them were never solved. A few were assumed drownings. One was thought to be a custody snatch gone wrong. Another a suspected runaway. But something had always bothered her. They all disappeared within walking distance of the river. And now a suitcase washed up with a child's remains. Not Madison's, someone else's. How many suitcases were out there? She stared at the timeline again, reordering the cases in her mind. Different towns, different families, same damn river. Atlas sat at her feet, ears twitching. She reached down, rubbed behind his ears. You've been trying to tell me this whole time, haven't you? She whispered. He didn't move. Didn't need to. That evening, Rachel drove home just to feed the cat, shower off the day, and pretend to eat something. But her mind wasn't in the kitchen or the mirror or the living room. It was back at the river, back with the suitcase. She kept seeing that little pink shoe. Who did it belong to? Who put it there and why now? It had been floating, the medical examiner said. Long enough to be waterlogged, but not long enough to fully decompose. That meant recent. That meant someone had just dumped it. This wasn't a ghost from 8 years ago. This was now. Later that night, she sat on the floor with Atlas, going through old photographs, some from training, others from crime scenes. One stuck out. A grainy photo of the 2012 case. A boy named Julian. Last seen near the old Willow Creek boat launch. In the photo, you could barely make out a man in the background, middle-aged, beard, wearing a fishing vest. She squinted, pulled out another photo from 2017. Different case. Another child, another river park. Same man. She hadn't noticed it before, probably because no one ever thought to look at the background. Rachel took a screenshot and uploaded it to the department's image recognition tool. She submitted it under a quiet pretext, not wanting to draw attention until she had something concrete. She looked at Atlas. Want to go for a ride? He stood before she finished the sentence. They drove back to the river, but not the same stretch. This time they went 5 miles upstream to where a rusted dock stuck out from a forgotten part of town. It was late. Moonlight played across the water in silver ribbons. Crickets chirped in the brush. Atlas hopped out of the SUV before she opened the door fully. He sniffed the air, stiffened, then darted into the grass. Atlas, wait, Rachel called, heart pounding. She grabbed her flashlight and ran after him. He stopped near a cluster of reeds. Growling, Rachel pushed through, heart in her throat. There, barely covered in leaves, was another suitcase, dark red this time, smaller, zipper broken. She stepped back and radioed in. It was past midnight by the time the second suitcase was processed. This one was empty, but the lining had been cut open. Stuffed inside the padding was a bracelet with the name Jules engraved in tiny cursive letters. Not Madison, not Julian. Someone new, another child. Another case. Rachel sat on the tailgate of her SUV and stared at the evidence bag, the bracelet glinting under the floodlights like a cruel joke. How many kids? How many suitcases? And how long had the river been hiding them? Atlas laid down beside her, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He wasn't done searching, and neither was she. Whatever this was, whoever had done it, they were still out there. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel knew she was chasing something real. Not ghosts, not hunches, a monster. And this time, she had the right dog at her side. Rachel Monroe hadn't been back in the old evidence room in almost 2 years. Most officers avoided it unless absolutely necessary. The air was dry, the lighting yellow and stale, and the old metal shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten boxes. Each one a symbol of something unfinished or worse, unsolved. She didn't need the reminder, but here she was again, cardboard boxes stacked around her like coffins, digging through what most of the department had already filed away as cold, dead leads. Atlas laid at the doorway, alert but calm. His ears perked up every time Rachel rustled plastic or opened a folder. He was watching her work, or maybe just waiting for her to figure out what he already knew. She reached for a box labeled case number 1172. Julian R., 2012. Her fingers paused for a second. She remembered this one vividly. Julian Ross was only 4 when he vanished near the Willow Creek boat launch. His mother had gone back to the car to grab sunscreen. Less than 3 minutes. When she returned, he was gone. No signs of struggle, no witnesses. Back then, Rachel had still been relatively new to field investigations. Atlas had just been assigned to her full-time. That case marked one of their first joint operations. She pulled the lid off and felt her stomach tighten at the sight of the contents. Crayon drawings, a yellow sippy cup, a folded park map with smudges from someone's sweaty palm. It was like opening a time capsule of grief. She flipped through the initial reports. Officer notes, statements. Nothing jumped out until she hit the second interview with a groundskeeper. A man in his 60s, white beard, glasses, said he might have seen a man with a red cooler leaving the dock, but figured it was just a fisherman. A cooler, just like someone might use to keep something cold or to hide something small. She made a note of the man's name and kept going. At the bottom of the file, a photo she hadn't remembered seeing before slipped out. It was blurry, taken on someone's old flip phone, barely better than nothing. It showed the riverbank near the dock. In the bottom right corner was a man standing knee-deep in the water, facing away, wearing a dark fishing vest. Rachel's stomach flipped. Same vest, same posture, same ghost from the background of the other photos. Who was he? She grabbed 2 more boxes. Madison Lake's case and one from a 2019 parents. Another child, a boy named Levi, vanished from a 4th of July picnic in Pendleton. All 3 locations were miles apart, but all hugged the Columbia River like pieces on a board. Each case file was different in tone, officer, and approach, but there were patterns, small, almost invisible ones. All took place in the summer. All victims were between ages 3 and 6. All disappeared near water access points, and all happened during community events or holidays. Busy scenes, crowds, distraction. She circled the similarities in red pen and stared at them. This wasn't random, she muttered. Someone planned this over and over again. Atlas whined softly as if encouraging her. Rachel tapped into the regional missing persons database and did a search for unsolved child disappearances within a 100-mile radius of the Columbia River over the last 20 years. 12 unsolved cases. She narrowed it to summertime vanishings. 7 over 20 years. And now 2 suitcases found within 48 hours of each other. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern. She printed out maps, photos, victim profiles. Her office walls slowly became a web of connections, dates, names, places. She wasn't even aware she'd skipped lunch until her stomach growled late in the afternoon. She grabbed a protein bar from her drawer, but kept pacing, chewing on data more than food. A knock at her door startled her. It was Officer Gina Patel from Missing Persons. You called me about the Suitcase case. Yeah, come in. Patel stepped inside, eyes widening at the wall. Whoa, you're going full true detective in here. Rachel gave a half smile. Feels like someone has to. Patel stared at one photo pinned in the center. A hand-drawn sketch of a man from 2009 created based on a witness description. Sunglasses, fishing hat, beard. Where'd this come from? Patel asked. Case from Umatilla. Girl named Sierra. 5 years old. Disappeared during a riverside baptism. A grandmother described a man she thought was off. This was the sketch the artist came up with. Patel blinked. That looks like the guy in the fishing vest. Rachel nodded slowly. I think he's the same person showing up near at least 4 of these disappearances. Patel stepped back, folding her arms. This is something. No, this is everything, Rachel said. This guy's been out there for decades, hiding in plain sight. We keep thinking the river's the killer, but it's not the river. It's whoever's been using it as a graveyard. That night, Rachel took Atlas out to the field behind her home. The stars above the Oregon sky were dim, drowned out by the town's lights, but still the night felt quieter than usual. As they walked, she thought about the bracelet. Jules. There were no missing kids named Jules in the official database. Maybe it was short for Julian or Julia. Maybe it wasn't even a name. Maybe it was a nickname. She sat on the grass and looked at Atlas. He sat beside her, alert as always. You remember them, don't you? She whispered. You knew where to look. Not just today, years ago. When everyone else stopped searching, you never did. Never. He rested his chin on her knee. She knew he couldn't speak. But something in his eyes said he didn't need to. Rachel went back inside and logged into the cold case database again. This time she searched local dog reports, bites, growls, incidents, anything K-9 related tied to public events near the river. In a 2012 report from the Pendleton Fireworks Festival, she found something that stopped her heart. German Shepherd assigned to perimeter detail growled repeatedly at unidentified male near vendor booths. Man claimed to be fishing guide. No ID. Subject left when questioned. No further incident. It was Atlas. He had tried to warn them, and they hadn't listened. The next morning, Rachel printed everything. Photos, reports, maps. She knew she was close, knew the truth was just a thread away from unraveling completely. She looked at her calendar. The town's summer fair was this weekend. Tents by the river. Families, kids, music. It was exactly the kind of place the man would strike again if he hadn't already. And maybe, just maybe, he'd be there, watching, waiting. Rachel ran her fingers down Atlas's back. Then looked at the board one last time. They weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were hunting a man. And for the first time in years, Rachel wasn't alone. She had a partner who never forgot, and together they were going to drag the truth out of the water no matter what it cost. By Thursday morning, Rachel Monroe's office smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. The air conditioning hummed like a low warning, and the wall behind her desk looked more like a conspiracy theorist's dream board than a police investigation. Photos, pins, maps, thread, but it wasn't a theory. It was a pattern. And it all pointed to a truth nobody in the department or the town for that matter had dared to speak out loud. There was a predator in their community. And he'd been hunting for years. She sat at her desk reviewing the names of every missing child connected to the Columbia River within a 20-year span. 7 cases had viable connections. 3 had photos or witness reports suggesting a middle-aged white male with facial hair and a fishing vest. 2 cases involved sightings near riverside churches. Rachel's pen froze mid-note. Churches. That hadn't jumped out before, but now it burned through her brain like a flare in the dark. She rifled through the Sierra case file. 2009, 5-year-old girl vanished during a riverside baptism near a now-defunct Pentecostal church called Rivers of Mercy just outside of Umatilla. She pulled the photo from that day. Family dressed in white, men in robes, a small cross nailed to a cedar tree. And in the far background, barely visible, a man near the bushes, fishing hat, beard, vest, the same damn silhouette. Rachel felt a chill rush through her, even in the warmth of the office. She opened a new window on her screen and searched. Rivers of Mercy Church, Umatilla, status, closed in 2015. Vacant property ownership transferred to a private buyer in 2017. No public record of who. Rachel called the Umatilla zoning office. An older woman named Louise picked up. Rivers of Mercy. "Oh, that place has been empty for years," Louise said, typing away in the background. "No congregation, no services. Some man bought it but never gave us trouble. Just kept to himself. Fixed the roof if I recall right." "Do you have a name?" Rachel asked, voice even. Pause, clicks. Yeah. Leonard Fry, purchased in April 2017. Rachel blinked. That name wasn't in any of the case files. Any listed occupation? Another pause. "Says retired chaplain," Louise read aloud. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. "Military?" "Nope. Prison." Rachel stared out the window for a long moment, piecing it together. A former prison chaplain buys a closed-down church by the river, keeps it private, off the radar, and doesn't allow public access. And the location, right between two known disappearance sites, her gut twisted. She called Patel at Missing Persons. "Do we have anything on a Leonard Fry?" she asked. "Give me a second." Patel tapped keys. Retired, mid-70s, no recent prior. Lived in Umatilla about 8 years. But get this, before that, he spent 2 decades as a chaplain in the Oregon State Penitentiary. No spouse, no kids. What about neighbors? Patel hesitated. Reported to be quiet. Keeps to himself. Brings canned goods to the food pantry. Old school loner. Rachel's stomach sank. "I want surveillance on the old Rivers of Mercy building. Quiet. Just eyes. No pressure yet." "You think he's the guy?" Patel asked. "I think he's either the guy or the key to the guy." That afternoon, Rachel loaded Atlas into her SUV and headed to Umatilla. She didn't wait for a team or request backup. She told herself it was just a drive, just recon, but she brought her badge and her gun. It was a 2-hour ride along the river, the same Columbia that had haunted her for over a decade. Atlas lay quietly in the back seat, eyes focused like he sensed they were heading towards something bigger than either of them could name. As she pulled onto the gravel road leading to the old church, Rachel slowed. The building sat tucked behind tall pines, mostly hidden from the road. The roof had been redone just like Louise said, but the paint was peeling, the sign barely legible. Rivers of Mercy, all welcome. Ironically, the gate was locked. Rachel parked a few yards back, stepped out, and looked around. Atlas jumped out beside her, ears twitching. No cars, no voices, no smoke. But something felt off. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was staged. Rachel called out, "Mr. Fry, Umatilla PD, just looking to ask a few questions." No response. She walked toward the gate. Atlas followed, nose low. She noticed an old wheelbarrow near the side of the building, half buried in weeds. Inside it, a rusted fishing vest. Rachel froze. She radioed, "Dispatch, Unit 42 requesting backup to abandoned church property, Rivers of Mercy, Umatilla outskirts. Possible link to cold cases." We'll hold perimeter until backup arrives. Copy that. Units en route. ETA 22 minutes. Too long. Atlas whined, then pulled toward the back of the property. Atlas, heel, Rachel whispered, but he didn't stop. He led her to the rear wall of the church. There, tucked between rotting wood and vines, was a padlocked cellar door. Atlas sniffed it, then looked up at her. Rachel stared at the lock. It was new. She pulled her flashlight and peered into the edges of the doorway. Cobwebs, dust, but also recent boot prints. Someone had been going in and out. Rachel stepped back, gun drawn now. She didn't like kicking doors without a warrant, but something told her she didn't have time to wait. She radioed again, requesting urgent entry approval. Possible holding area or evidence site discovered. Sending GPS. The dispatch officer hesitated. Approved. Proceed with caution. Rachel exhaled slowly. She raised her foot and kicked the lock with all her strength. The chain snapped. Dust exploded upward as the door creaked open. It was pitch black below. Atlas growled. Rachel turned on her flashlight. The basement smelled of mildew, old wood, and something far worse, chemicals and decay. The beam of her flashlight landed on an old cot, a rope, a shelf full of canned food and books, and on the far wall, child drawings, crayons, scribbles, a rainbow, a sad face, a name written 3 times in crooked letters, Jules. Rachel staggered forward. This was a holding room. Maybe not now, maybe not for years, but someone, a child, had been kept here. She backed out slowly, her pulse thundering in her ears. Atlas stayed close, tail down. She radioed again. Confirmed. We have a basement used for detainment, requesting forensics, full crime scene support. Bring child trauma specialist. Bring everything. She slumped against her SUV, staring at the broken gate. The church wasn't just symbolic. It was a hub, a staging ground, maybe even a trap. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. The property was sealed. Rachel gave her statement. But even as officers swarmed the site and markers were placed, she couldn't stop staring at the name on the wall. Jules, the bracelet in the second suitcase. Who was Jules? And where was she now? That night, Rachel sat outside her home. Atlas curled at her feet. The stars above seemed brighter than usual. She stared up, breathing slowly. They were close. She could feel it. But she also knew whatever they were about to uncover would change everything. By the next morning, the church was cordoned off like a crime scene from a movie. Yellow tape fluttered in the summer breeze. Forensics vans lined the gravel road. Local news crews had caught wind of something significant happening at the Old Rivers of Mercy property, but the department issued a tight-lipped statement, ongoing investigation, no public comment at this time. Rachel Monroe stood outside the cellar entrance, sipping bitter gas station coffee she barely tasted. Her shirt stuck to her back. Her eyelids felt like sandpaper, and she hadn't slept in 36 hours. Atlas sat calmly at her side, but his ears twitched with every sound, every vehicle door, every echo from the basement below. "Find anything new?" asked Gina Patel, stepping up beside her with a folder and dark circles under her eyes. Rachel nodded toward the cellar. "We recovered 3 fingerprints. One is definitely a child's. Likely female. No match yet. The other 2 are smudged. Forensics is running everything. And that wheelbarrow tested positive for blood residue. Same with the vest," Rachel said quietly. "Too degraded for a clean sample, but it was there." Patel winced. They didn't need to say it out loud. Whoever used this church had done so for years. As investigators swept through the property, Rachel took a break to sit beneath one of the big cedars along the perimeter. It was peaceful there. Ironically, birds chirping, breeze through the branches. Atlas sat beside her, but suddenly his nose lifted. "Something?" she asked. He stood, ears forward, tail rigid, and then he bolted. "Atlas, wait." Rachel dropped her coffee and took off after him through the trees past the edge of the clearing. He darted down a shallow slope toward an old maintenance shed, one no one had bothered to search. She reached the door just as he began scratching furiously at it. It was locked with a simple padlock. Rachel stepped back and kicked it open. The musty smell of old tools and rotting wood filled her nose, but Atlas didn't hesitate. He ran to the far corner where a metal milk crate sat partially buried under tarp and dust. Inside it, a set of spiral notebooks bound with rubber bands. Rachel picked one up and opened it. Her breath caught. They were logs, handwritten entries, dated, cold, precise. Each entry listed a date, a location, and a single letter. R. J. M. S. She flipped to the back of one notebook. A note was scrawled, "Cleansed in the river. All accounted for. All returned to silence." Her fingers trembled as she closed the notebook. Back at the station, they scanned and reviewed every page. There were 11 notebooks in total. The logs went back 23 years. Names were never fully written, just initials. But cross-referencing the dates and locations, Patel confirmed at least 5 matched existing missing persons cases. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The notebooks didn't belong to Leonard Fry. His handwriting, collected from public forms and mail over the years, didn't match, and neither did his style. These were obsessive, detailed. He'd never been this methodical. So who had written them? Rachel paced her office, chewing on the end of a pen. Fry may have bought the church, but that shed, those logs, that system, it belonged to someone else. Patel looked uneasy. "You think he let someone else use the property?" "I think he didn't ask questions," Rachel replied. "And I think someone in this town, maybe more than one person, knew damn well what was going on." Later that evening, Rachel drove to a local diner. Not to eat, but to talk to someone. The cook, Marcus Slim Dit, was a Vietnam vet and lifelong local. He'd worked maintenance around town for years and was known to keep tabs on everything and everyone. People called him a gossip, but Rachel knew better. Slim remembered everything. She ordered a black coffee and sat at the counter. "Slim," she said after a few minutes. "You ever remember seeing a guy around the river during the 2000s? Bearded, fishing gear, kept to himself." Slim didn't answer right away. He wiped down the counter, eyes narrowed. "You talking about the fella who used to volunteer at the food pantry?" Real quiet. "Maybe." Slim leaned in. "He used to sit in the back at church socials. Never talked much. Wore that same vest no matter the season. Kids said he smelled like gasoline." "Name?" Slim shrugged. "Everyone called him Pastor J. Don't think he was a real pastor, though." Rachel's pulse jumped. "You ever see him with kids?" Slim paused, then nodded. "Saw him once with a little girl, curly hair, maybe 4 or 5. Wasn't his, though." She kept looking around like she was lost. Rachel's grip tightened on the coffee mug. "Where did you see that?" "Summer Fair, 09, I think." That night, Rachel went back to the evidence room. She pulled files from the 2009 disappearance of a girl named Julia Fields, age 5. Last seen at a fairgrounds event near the Columbia. The name on her bracelet, Jules. Rachel nearly dropped the file. It wasn't a coincidence. That bracelet in the suitcase was hers. And now the logs, the initials, the location, it all lined up. Julia had been held at the Rivers of Mercy basement, and no one had looked for her in years. The next morning, Atlas helped them find another site half a mile upriver from the church, tucked behind a wall of bramble and oak. It was an old concrete drainage culvert, half collapsed, long forgotten by the town. Inside it was another suitcase. This one sealed in black plastic. They brought in forensics and opened it carefully. No body, just a dress, a rusted charm necklace, and a child's waterlogged drawing. A sun, a stick-figure dog, and 3 words in pink crayon, "My name Jules." The town held its breath. News quietly spread through the police grapevine and eventually hit the press. Rachel kept the core details close, releasing only what was necessary, an active investigation into a pattern of disappearances linked by location and evidence. But rumors swirled. Some said there was a killer in town. Others said it was part of a trafficking ring. A few even whispered about cult activity. Everyone had a theory. Rachel only had facts and a dog who hadn't stopped searching. That night, she sat on the porch of her home, watching Atlas sleep beside her. She looked out over the fields, the edge of the forest beyond. Somewhere out there, the man who kept those notebooks still walked free. He could be a neighbor, a janitor, a retired coach, maybe someone Rachel passed in the store every Sunday, but he'd made a mistake. He let Jules leave behind her name. And now they had the whisper network, the logs, the clues. And were getting louder. Rachel sipped her coffee and whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "We're coming for you." Atlas didn't move, but his tail thumped once, slow and steady, like he understood, like he was ready. The sun had barely risen when Rachel Monroe parked her cruiser along the gravel shoulder of Oak Ridge Lane. It was a dead-end road that bordered the river to the west and a stretch of old farmland to the east. Not a place tourists ever found, or locals even remembered. But this morning, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to this point. Atlas sat beside her, head high, eyes sharp. He hadn't taken his gaze off the trailhead for the last 10 minutes. Rachel checked her sidearm, not out of fear, but instinct. They were close. She felt it in her chest. The Whisper Network logs had led them here, not with a full name, not with an address, but with patterns. One of the most recent entries marked only as MJ, 6, July, Oak Ridge, retired booth. A place, a month, an age. Oak Ridge was the last piece of land owned by a retired county fair coordinator named John Marshall, now 72, widowed, lived alone in a trailer set back behind rows of pine. No record, no prior, but he matched every eyewitness sketch from the last 20 years. Fishing vest, beard, glasses, too ordinary to question, too forgettable to fear. Rachel stepped out of the cruiser. The morning air was thick with river mist and silence. Atlas stood before her like a statue, muscles coiled tight. "Ready," she whispered. He moved without hesitation. They took the trail slowly, cautiously, Rachel's boots crunching on twigs and moss. About 100 yards in, the woods opened up to reveal a clearing. And beyond it, the silhouette of a weathered Airstream trailer surrounded by brush and rusted junk. And there he was, sitting in a plastic lawn chair, sipping from a dented thermos. John Marshall. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I figured you'd come sooner or later," he said calmly, eyes flicking to Atlas. "Dog's the only one who ever remembered." Rachel's breath caught. "You knew we were coming." Marshall shrugged. "You dig long enough, you always find bones." He said it like a joke. Rachel's hand moved to her sidearm. "We know about the church. We found the logs. Jules, Levi, Julian." His expression didn't change. "You never looked at me twice," he said, shaking his head. "You all thought it was the water. That's the thing with rivers. People want to believe they swallow bad things. That way, no one has to ask what really happened." "You used it to hide," Rachel said. "To cleanse the evidence." He nodded slowly, and nobody ever looked past it. Atlas growled low in his throat. Marshall looked down at him. "He was at the fair in 17. Remember that?" He barked and barked. I thought he was going to bite me. Rachel stepped forward. Stand up. Turn around. You're under arrest for the suspected abduction and murder of at least 5 minors. He didn't move. I've got evidence, witnesses, and one hell of a dog that never gave up. Marshall smiled softly. You know what's funny? He asked. I don't even remember all their names. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Atlas lunged first, not to attack, but to block. Behind them, a shotgun cocked. Rachel spun around just in time to see a second man step from the trees. Younger, maybe in his 50s, eyes wide with adrenaline, dressed in flannel and jeans, the barrel aimed straight at her chest. Drop it, the man shouted. Drop your weapon now. Rachel froze. Who are you? She demanded. I'm his nephew, the man growled. And you're trespassing. Marshall chuckled behind her. Told you she'd come. But in that moment, Atlas leapt straight for the gunman. The man fired. The shot rang out like thunder, but Atlas caught his arm mid-trigger, jaws locking onto his wrist. Rachel dove low and tackled the man hard into the dirt, yanking the weapon away as Atlas released his grip. Blood soaked into the grass. Rachel cuffed him, panting hard. Guns clear, she shouted, shaking. Then she turned to Atlas and saw the blood on his side. No, 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 she murmured, falling to her knees beside him. Atlas was still standing, shaking, but alive. The bullet had grazed his rib cage, bleeding, but not deep. You saved my life, she whispered, pressing gauze to the wound. Just like always, he licked her hand gently. Backup arrived 6 minutes later. It was over. John Marshall and his nephew were arrested and charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, unlawful detainment, and conspiracy. Forensics later confirmed DNA matches to 5 cold cases, including Jules, Julian, and Sierra. Inside the trailer, investigators found locks of hair, photo negatives, and recordings. Decades of hidden horrors. The river hadn't been swallowing the children. Marshall had. A month later, the town of Pendleton held a memorial at the riverbank. Rachel stood at the front, dressed in plain clothes. Atlas beside her in a new custom-fitted vest with a stitched patch. He never forgot. There was no speech long enough to erase what had happened, but there was silence, candles, tears, and maybe for the first time in years, peace. Rachel looked down at her partner. He was older now, slower, healing. But in his eyes, there was still fire. You knew before any of us, she whispered. Atlas leaned against her leg, breathing deep, steady. She didn't need words to understand what he was saying. He'd never stopped searching. Not for Madison, not for Jules, not for justice. In the days that followed, parents came to the station just to shake Rachel's hand. Kids drew pictures of Atlas. Someone even dropped off a giant bag of treats labeled Hero Snacks. The mayor issued a public commendation for unmatched service and dedication to both of them. Rachel didn't care about the headlines. What mattered was that the river was finally quiet. Not because the water had changed, but because the truth had risen to the surface. Thank you for following this story to the end. We hope Officer Rachel and Atlas's journey moved you, inspired you, and reminded you of the incredible bond between people and their animals. What did you feel during this story? Did a specific part stay with you or remind you of a dog you've loved? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional, true-life-inspired stories about the animals who change everything.